Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first this week for our two games is 1993's Rocket Knight Adventures, Konami's take on Sonic the Hedgehog, with an armored opossum knight who uses his jetpack and sonic boom sword to save the kidnapped princess.
Following that is a noir-inspired romp through a particularly scaly version of New York City as you attempt to put together clues and discover the mystery of The Event. 2019's Later Alligator.
You may be listening wondering, what's the theme this week? Games I've never heard of? And okay, I get that. I mean, I hardly know anything about these games either. That's fair. But honestly, the main theme here between these two games, it's very obscure, anthropomorphic main characters. That's the best we got, honestly.
On your end, it's a game that was one of the ocean of mascot platformers trying to capitalize on Sonic. And on my end, it's a game that everybody listening should play. Do it.
Well, I can't wait to learn more about it then. But first, Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
It's basically just been a lot of Ender Lilies. I'm in the last area. It's incredibly hostile and hard, which, I mean, fair. That's what it's supposed to be. But like, whoo, boy, it's very difficult. I got to that point in a Metroidvania where I was like, I'm going to look up a map and just clean up the places I've already been. And then when I got to this area, the final area, I was just like, okay, map's closed. We'll come back to it later. So I will probably be done with Ender Lilies by the time we record the next episode. I hope. And also, like, literally about half an hour before we started recording, I finished Chapter 3 of Danganronpa.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I'm getting there. I'm very slowly working my way towards it. I'm hoping to finish it before Great Ace Attorney and The World Ends With You comes out, but we'll see.
Yes, definitely exciting for sure. So now you kind of get like how it's a better case, that Chapter 3 than the first two, and it only gets better from there.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree. Though I guessed the whole plot pretty early.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm kind of proud of myself for it, but I also have learned that I'm really stupid when it comes to absorb bullets.
Oh, yeah, they're tough.
I never realized that that's what I'm supposed to do, so we'll see how it goes from here.
Well, fingers crossed. I've had another down week of playing games, haven't really done too much. Honestly, though, it could be good, because, doing some real adult things, trademark, but it also has a lot of stress come with it, so we'll see how that all pans out. Before we get to talking about our games, let's talk about some composer follow-up news. Things are happening in the game industry, and sometimes we like to, provide updates on composers that we've talked about on this show. Certain updates, like how out now, as of you're listening to this episode, but a couple days away from our time of recording, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD is out now on Nintendo Switch. You can check out episode 66 of Original Soundchat for our thoughts on the original game, as well as its composer, Hajime Wakai.
At time of recording, the review embargo, just lifted today, and I'm hearing pretty good things about it overall. So that's good to hear. I don't think I'm going to buy it right away. There's too much new stuff coming out that I can't bring myself to purchase a game I've already played.
Yeah, absolutely. I played Skyward Sword within the last couple of years. I think I'm okay for a little bit. It does sound like a good remaster, but it's been interesting to see how people have soured on Skyward Sword since it first came out in 2011.
Yeah, though, I mean, a lot of that sourness was there when it came out, too. Meanwhile, in the weirdest thing I think either of us have ever had to talk about in this segment, Joe Hisaishi composed for a short animated project called Dear Alice, and it's a Chobani commercial? Like for Chobani yogurt and such? What?
I mean, it was interesting to watch, and the music did sound great, but Chobani.
Yeah, it's beautifully animated, and like I'd watch a whole movie animated like that. But yeah, maybe marketing has gone too far.
It was odd to come across that one for sure. And last week on the show, we talked about Lorne Balfe and how he was composing the score for the just released Amazon Prime film, The Tomorrow War, which stars Chris Pratt. Well, as I watched Black Widow in theaters, the first Marvel film of Phase 4 in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, music composed by Lorne Balfe. Oh, okay, so he worked on that one too. The man's busy.
I mean, hey, that means that he wrote for one very successful movie and then also The Tomorrow War. So, hey, get that money.
And then he probably also wrote it a couple years ago, and they've just been waiting and waiting.
Yeah. Yeah. And lastly, Donkey Kong turned 40 recently, and in celebration, Grant Kirkhope recorded a short video of him going through some of DK64's original recordings for its sound files, like its voice grunts and all that. This, by the way, was on his Twitter at Grant Kirkhope. You can find the video. The worst part is that I could tell which ones were actually used in the game just hearing them, not even processed, not lowered, nothing. Just hearing the sounds as they were, and I could tell which ones actually ended up in DK64.
That's amazing. I was hoping you'd get a kick out of that, that's for sure.
I don't know if I'd call it amazing. I think it's more, man, my brain sure decided to compartmentalize some weird stuff.
Or Stockholm Syndrome, whatever it is.
That too.
All right, let's talk about our first game this week. This is Rocket Knight Adventures. This is a fan suggestion, so thank you for bringing this game to our attention. Certainly a game I had zero knowledge of, so learning about it was quite interesting. So hopefully I get to pass whatever knowledge I gained on to you. So Rocket Knight Adventures, released on August 6th, 1993, in Japan for the Sega Mega Drive. North America would get the game for Sega Genesis on September 3rd, 1993, and Europe would also get the game in September 1993, but of course for Mega Drive as well. It is developed and published by Konami. Rocket Knight Adventures is a 2D side-scrolling action platformer. You play as Sparkster, who is an armored opossum knight. It's an opossum who's kind of anthropomorphized, and he has big blue knight armor on, and he has a jetpack. It's quite a character design for sure. Sparkster is the leader of the Rocket Knights Elite Fighting Force. The player, as Sparkster, is able to jump, attack with Sparkster's sword, either directly with slashes or by shooting energy forward, like basically shooting out sonic booms when the sword is swung. Or you can charge up Sparkster's rocket pack, his jetpack, and go flying in one of the 8 standard directions, depending on what direction the player chooses. If no direction is pressed, Sparkster will just perform a stationary spinning attack. A spinning attack in place. I wonder what that takes inspiration from. Occasionally, though, you will get some 2D side-scrolling shooting levels, a la Gradius or any of the similar kind of spaceship shooting kind of levels. So you'll get a couple of those to kind of mix up the gameplay. There is barely any story conveyed in Rocket Knight Adventures itself, the game itself. It's like maybe 4 cutscenes, and you can maybe get some context out of that. But, like games in the early 90s, the manual. You gotta read that manual, Joe, to get the information about the story of the game. So,
oh god, it's happening again.
Quote, "The kingdom of Zebulos has recently come under attack from the nearby Devotendos Empire. Overwhelmed by the robot-led army's attack, the Zebulon forces are nearly wiped out. The Zebulon Empire is on the verge of crumbling. Sparkster feels the presence of Axel Gear behind the attack, and he heads to the castle Zebulon. Sure enough, the banished Rocket Knight Axel Gear has taken the princess. He plans to use her as a hostage to blackmail the Zebulon king and get the key to the seal, which would unlock the evil Pig Star ship. But he doesn't realize that the princess is the only one left who knows the location of the key. So I guess the big question is, can Sparkster save the princess and stop Axelgear? It's basically rescue the princess, stop the rogue soldier from unleashing this big bad force. It's pretty simple for the 90s in games. So Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Rocket Knight Adventures?
I have only ever heard the name, usually in the same sentence as, was a cool game that nobody played. So I did not know how blatant of a Sonic thing it was. I think I knew that it was, one of those games that was, Sonic is really big right now. We need our own Sonic. We gotta get our Sonic now. And that's all I know about it. I also know there's another game called Sparkster that I think is either a sequel or a predecessor. I don't know for sure, actually.
Well, we'll have to learn about what Sparkster actually is, because I didn't know that either. So, yeah, I am very much in the same way of, I had heard the name a couple times. I knew it was for Genesis. I knew I had this little opossum knight, and that's it. So I had no idea about the story, what the gameplay even was, and I'm not sure I learned too much more, to be very honest, because, yeah, it is a kind of cult hit these days for those who have the nostalgia with playing it, but boy, not the universal recognition as maybe even some other attempted mascots at the time. So what I could glean was that the game was directed by Nobuya Nakazato, who was coming off of directing Contra 3, The Alien Wars. And so this kind of comes from the Contra unit at Konami. Let's try something else, a side-scrolling platformer. See, because they were certainly inspired at the time with the success of one Sonic the Hedgehog. Certainly taking the Mega Drive, the Genesis by storm, the game industry by storm, really, as a competitor to Mario. And, maybe kids and young adults these days like mascot platformers. So let's come up with our mascot platformer, and I guess this was Konami's answer to Sonic the Hedgehog, or some way that they could glean that kind of attention. In Rocket Knight Adventures, at least the United States release of the game, there were 4 difficulty levels. There was Children, Easy, Normal, and Hard. But the Japanese and European versions of the game had only 2 difficulties. Europe had Easy and Hard, and Japan had Normal and Hard. The American Normal and Hard versions, though, could be accessed in those Japanese and European versions through cheat devices, where they are considered very hard and crazy hard. So yeah, just think about how the American Easy was labeled hard in both the Japanese and European versions, which is kind of backwards, right? Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, usually it goes the other way. The only other game I've ever heard of going that way is Devil May Cry 3.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. So just how hard was hard or crazy hard? It's one-hit deaths, and you have no continues if you run out of lives. You have to start the whole game from the beginning.
No, thank you.
That would be crazy hard.
Thanks for the offer, though.
Yeah, I think I'll maybe play on Children. Thanks. Another difference, though, like many games at the time, was angry eyes, angry mouth. As you may see on the cover art, the thumbnail art, whether you're on podcast services or you're on the YouTube channel, Rhymes with Asia, where we post these episodes of Original Soundchat, you see that Sparkster has just a kind of frowny face, and this is his representation on the American box art. But in Japan and Europe, he's a happy boy. He's got a happy smile, open mouth. So, it's almost like White Kirby. Those Americans, they like the tough, angry brows.
You see, as an American, I am legally obligated to not buy anything that shows happiness happening on the cover. I have to buy things that show anger, for I am also angry. I've never understood the idea behind that.
Someone somewhere in some marketing boardrooms thought that this is what was needed to market games to kids in the States, I guess. Well, a Super Nintendo version of Rocket Knight Adventures was planned, but never released. When it launched, Rocket Knight Adventures was reviewed very well at the time, with most publications either between 8 or 9 out of 10, a lot of them actually closer to 9 out of 10. The music and graphics were praised, but it is a pretty difficult game. Fair, but it can take quite a bit of trial and error. However, it wasn't that big of a hit. Apparently, Rocket Knight Adventures was the 207th best-selling game of 1993. Yeah, so that one didn't really hit. Couldn't find any awards associated with the game at the time. It was 1993. You weren't really having awards made for video games. And then 2 follow-up games were made. This was Sparkster, Rocket Knight Adventures 2 on the Mega Drive and Genesis, released in 1994, alongside Sparkster on the Super Nintendo. Now, despite both of these games being produced simultaneously and sharing the same name of Sparkster, also the same box art, they are different games, sharing only their character design and music score.
Of course they are.
With the Mega Drive release acting as a direct sequel, and the Super Nintendo game being a spin-off.
I guess that is something that Konami's done before, like with Rondo of Blood and Dracula X.
Yeah, that's a good point. What is it with Konami?
That's a long topic to get into.
To make matters worse, though, these games are often confused for being the same game because the Rocket Knight Adventures 2 subtitle is only used in Japan. Again, decisions by Konami. Then, Konami had British developer Climax Studio make Rocket Knight, a sequel to Sparkster Rocket Knight Adventures 2. This is not a remake of the original Rocket Knight Adventures, mind you. And this game released for Xbox Live Arcade on Xbox 360, PlayStation Network on PS3, and Steam on PC in May 2010. I viewed the box art for Rocket Knight and got like this horrible flashback of like, oh gosh, I remember seeing this, but like not having any idea what it was, if it was tied to a previous game or whatever. Not that I ever played it, but like, oh, this kind of creepy, cringy art looks familiar.
Were they trying to make a series you needed like a corkboard and red string to be able to follow? Like, at that point, it feels like they did it on purpose.
Yeah, maybe. At that point, you'd think, like, making, HD remakes was starting to become, in vogue. So, like, just make an HD remaster of the original at that point if you want to bring the franchise back. Yeah, because the original director had nothing to do with these games. It was just a British development. Oh, just crazy. Konami decisions, everybody. So, Sparkster is a playable character in a couple Konami games, these being 2008's New International Track and Field for Nintendo DS, as well as Crazy Kart Racing, crazy with a K, on iOS. So, yeah, nothing notable. Some small cameos in some other Konami games, but yeah, just Konami in general. We're probably not going to be seeing Sparkster anytime soon.
Yeah. They don't make games anymore.
Yeah, I mean, unless he shows up in a pachinko machine with like rocket boosters everywhere, I don't know.
Now that we've said that, whatever Silent Hill game comes out from whenever the future decides to bring me pain, there's just going to be a Sparkster figurine on some desk.
Oh no.
Because they're listening to this episode.
And a zombified version of him will show up as an enemy in that game.
That'd be awesome, actually. Give me that.
The composer associated with leading up the composition team on Rocket Knight Adventures is Masanori Oouchi. Oouchi is how I've seen him credited in some other places. In the game, though, in the credits, he's credited as Ohuchi. Either way, can't find anything on Masanori Oouchi on the internet. At the time, he was part of the Konami Kukeiha Club, which was their music composition team at Konami. So obviously he was employed by Konami and worked there for a while. And he may be working in like some pop music composition or arrangement on like Discogs, that website. I saw some album credits for like Shoko Nakagawa, AKB48, etc., some other acts. But yeah, I don't really know if he's doing video games anymore.
Does Konami own a record label in Japan? I feel like they do.
Oh, they may.
That might be it.
Maybe he moved over there, but certainly it wasn't, many albums to his credit. It was certainly interesting to try to dig in the variations of his spelling and just nothing. So as far as the discography that he has worked on in games, it's kind of broken down between his different roles, or at least how he's credited. So when it's music or music composed by, he has that for Rocket Knight Adventures and Motor Tune Grand Prix. On sound design, he worked on Q-Brick, Poppin' Twin Bee, and Tiny Toon Adventures Acme All-Stars, as well as Snatcher. He is credited for sound effect work on Aliens and Contra 3, The Alien Wars. He is also the lyricist for the track Nocturne on Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I was hoping when I saw that he was a lyricist on Symphony of the Night, I was hoping it was for I Am the Wind. Unfortunately, not so.
Unfortunate.
But yeah, apparently the story goes that, he was working on sound effects for Contra 3, The Alien Wars. And then the director, Nakazato, just said like, hey, I'm going to have you go and lead this team of music composers with some of our newer blood in the company. So Masanori Oouchi led this team of new blood at Konami that included Akihata, Masanori Adachi, Hiroshi Kobayashi, and one Michiru Yamane. Very interesting to see her name pop up. I think a wiki said even Akira Yamaoka was on that team as well, but he wasn't in the game's credits and he wasn't in other places. So maybe that's just some false reporting there. But yeah, Michiru Yamane. There she is.
I don't remember how long Yamaoka had been at Konami. I feel like I should know this because I'm the one that brought him up, but that was 2 years ago, to be fair.
It was real close, though, like right at the beginning. So like it could have had some overlap, but, hard to say. I thought a fun little bit of trivia, though, was that apparently when you're on the Game Over Continue screen, you have the option of yes and no, and Sparkster can look if you've selected the yes option and music continues to play. But if you toggle over to no and he looks over there, the music stops. And it's just like, all right, continue. No. Nothing.
You get nothing.
Seemed pretty amusing to watch in a long play. All right, let's talk about the music, though, for Rocket Knight Adventures. And this is the critical 5 tracks. Let's get to number 1 here. This is Stage 1-1. So, yes, Stage 1-1 pretty much exactly describes where it plays in the game, as do the titles for the rest of these. Look, it wasn't a time where composers were really allowed to flex their creative titling and, come up with fun little descriptions and titles for these tracks, so the best we get is Stage 1-1. Though, another rip of the soundtrack added like a supplemental title, and I think this was fan done, to be honest. So this was titled Kingdom of Zebulos. Pretty fair. It's the beginning of the game where you get to finally take control of Sparkster and kind of test out his abilities. It's interesting how it's a pretty upbeat fanfare that, introduces you to the world and the character. And it may seem like it's a kind of green field that you're running on and all that, but in the background and what you're jumping on, it's like burned out barren trees. And there are cottages on fire scrolling in the background. So I don't know if it's like the best fit of like happy tones, positive fanfare, da, 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 when there's all this destruction from this pig army attack. So I think it's, a theme that a lot of people associate with the first level of the game, but I don't know, maybe not the best pairing. At least that was the impression I got learning about the game.
It does have sort of a Final Fantasy 1 style to it, if that makes sense. Like, this sounds like a less complicated version could be like ripped straight out of Final Fantasy 1.
Yeah.
And I guess that does fit, like, you're the hero you've come to save, but hearing that you're doing this in front of like a burning village, yeah, no, you guys probably should have like talked to the composer about what was going on in the level before you had them start writing music.
I feel like this would be kind of a bit of a running theme with this, because I wonder if, like, especially with this team of composers, like many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, maybe they were just coming up with music and, I don't know, not necessarily referring to what was happening on screen. Because Shantae Burning Town, this is not. Let's put it that way. It just does not seem to fit. But it's certainly a fanfare and a theme to start out the game. Number 2 on the Critical 5 here. This is Boss. So there are 7 stages in the game, and there is a boss fight at the end of each one. And once you guess, this music plays during a boss fight. Which boss fight? Every boss fight, except for the final one, of course. There is also a mini-boss theme, like kind of in the middle of the level, you'll take on a mini-boss, and that one, oddly enough, like probably sounds like the closest to like a Sonic the Hedgehog boss fight, which is interesting. But I feel like this is important here for like the big fights of the game. It is strange that it's so repetitive and that you hear it each time. There's really no variation there, but then you're like just building off of a warning drone here for the impending threat, and I think that fits. It doesn't do too much with the piece, though, I think, besides the chord progression, at least the building up of the tension, except for later in the piece, and that kind of goes places. Just overall a good representation of the tension and the stakes here. It's not an all-timer boss theme by any means, but I think it fits the bill pretty well for this game, albeit repetitive.
I think this song is really, really cool. Especially, like, when I think of Genesis music, I think of, like, this crunchy synth sound that the Super Nintendo couldn't do. And so, like, this song, putting that, like, front and center and just making it this really driving piece. Yeah, it's a little weird that it's such a short loop, seemingly, but back in those days, judging by my experiences from Smasterpieces, we didn't start getting really good boss fight themes regularly until, like, the N64. Mm-hmm. So
That's fair. And yeah, you're right. It's definitely a piece where you hear it and it's like, that's Genesis sound shit, baby. It's all the good that comes with it. Number 3 on the critical tracks for Rocket Knight Adventures. This is Stage 2-1. Definitely hear that Genesis crunch there and what is kind of almost sounding to be like electric guitar, something like that. It's like, oh, it's another Genesis synth sound for sure. From that other rip, this was alternatively titled Across the Lake, which makes sense because it takes place in a level where there's like caves and you're swimming and there's like these kind of dark green crystals in the background and you're dodging spikes. So, a mascot platformer in the water. It's kind of fitting, I think, that this song is very much like a Sonic the Hedgehog song. You could certainly imagine this piece in a Sonic game. You get those heavy saw synths setting that pace before the melody cuts in with just a pretty lighthearted, fun sort of synth melody there. Almost like getting the electric piano coming in. But again, is it the best match for what's going on and dodging all these spikes? The beginning, yes, but then the melody comes in and kind of adds a bit of whimsy to it, I think.
It comes off as like a surfing level.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I love this song. This song is great. I think it's a very close second for my favorite song out of the Critical 5. It's really catchy. And it gets in your head real quick and just sounds fun.
Yeah, and maybe they heard water and they thought, oh, you're on top of the water. No, you're in the water. I don't know. Just speculating here. Number 4 on the Critical 5. Let's get to the next one. And this is Stage 5-1. Alright, this one is alternatively titled Kingdom of DeVader, or however the heck you pronounce that. It's these games that come up with like weird empire names, almost seems Greek in a way. DeVader. Anyway, this is a side-scrolling flight level. So Sparkster has his jetpack on full throttle and he's flying and, swinging his sword and trying to take down these enemies almost like in a side-scrolling flight shooter. But he's going through a cyberpunk city. It's almost looks like burned out a little bit. Definitely has a dark, dystopic look behind it. And this is because you're invading that pig empire kingdom. All these enemies you've been fighting, they come from there in this kingdom of DeVader. So it's another high-stakes action track, and you get the different feel of it when you have this kind of flight level going on. Starts with some kind of unsettling chords, but then gets right into it. I like the little warbling synth that goes wid, 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 woo. Like it kind of has a little different feel to it. Some fun things on the Genesis sound chip, and yeah, it's a track that a lot of fans seem to have some good nostalgia for when you're finally assaulting the Empire City.
I'm going to say something that might get me shot amongst Genesis grow-uppers. Yeah, that's what we'll call them. While I think the Genesis does super well with really low notes and that crunchy, sort of bassy stuff, boy, I don't think the Genesis is very good at higher notes. Mm-hmm. And this song, I don't know, I'm having trouble getting past that because of that specific issue. It's just so, it sounds like tinnitus. It just sounds like tinnitus to me. And I don't know how else to explain it. I don't think this song is bad. It's just, man, I don't think the Genesis did great with notes higher than a certain key signature, if that makes sense.
I can see what you mean. And while it may not bother some people, if you're especially sensitive to those higher frequencies, yeah, it can be a bit much, for sure. I get that. Wrapping up the Critical 5 for Rocket Knight Adventures, it's the final level. This is Stage 7. Stage 7 is alternatively titled in some rips as The Pig Star, in all caps, exclamation point. So yes, it is the final level where you're having these big battle confrontations, these little mini bosses aboard the Pig Star. Especially notable that it's the first phase against Axle Gear. I think this is my favorite song on the Critical 5. I think it's amazing to have this kind of song be on the Mega Drive. And you mentioned how the Genesis excels at those lower frequency notes, the bass there, and having it sound crunchy. It's throbbing house music. You can imagine it like it's on a dance floor. And it's crunchy because it's 16-bit, yeah, but wow, it sounds so good for the time. Just kudos to Oouchi and the team, because that's just fantastic. You may wonder, why not include the final boss theme? I didn't find the first phase of it to be that memorable, and then the second phase of the boss fight is just the boss theme sped up. Faster. So, yeah, maybe not, but this one I think is outstanding.
Yeah, I think you made the right choice. This song is awesome. It is also my favorite on the Critical 5. Yeah, you pointed it out already, but like, I was just talking about the Genesis excels at deep notes. Well, here's a song that's basically almost all deep notes, and hey, it's the best song that I've heard from the game thus far. Like, I don't think that's coincidence.
Yeah, it really goes places, and, you know, for all the tension of the final levels, I mean, I think that's fitting. Let's get to a couple songs on the cutting room floor, though. And I have two. For me, the first one is Stage 3. This one is alternatively titled Going Underground, which makes sense because you're going through a level where you're in these caves, and it must be like some sort of volcano or something, because there's just this open magma in these caves. A lot of lava there. I know magma's when it's in the earth, lava when it's outside the earth. It's fiery, it's red. Okay, those are the big threats that you have in the level.
It's fiery, it's red, and if you touch it, you're dead. That's all you need to know.
That's what you need to know. So it's a pretty simplistic song. Just a strong melody and a rhythm going, but not much accompaniment around it. But I think its pace drives the action. And this is another case where I think it sounds more positive than I would have expected, given dark caves, lava, the whole bit. It's a positive fanfare, I think, and maybe, again, not the best fit.
This is another song where I listen to it and I'm like, this sounds like a JRPG theme. Like, I could hear this being, I don't know, maybe not the overworld, but like a town theme or something.
Yeah, kind of closer to the end of the game.
Yeah, it definitely does not scream lava cave to me, but it's still very good.
It is a good piece of music. That's why I needed to go on the cutting room floor. Just like this other one on the cutting room floor for me, Stage 6. Alternatively titled Deep Space. This takes place kind of when you're going to that Pig Star final level from the Pig Empire City. So this is another side-scrolling Gradius-like space level. And you know what? I think they actually did a pretty good pairing here because, techno beats representing action and space. Yeah, I can get down with that. Sign me up. There was a YouTube commenter that just said, running in the 90s. And I'm like, oh no, it is. That's so right.
Well, now I have to call it my favorite song of the soundtrack. I'm a civil man. You compare it to Initial D, I'm in.
You know what? Fair. Absolutely fair. So what will I never forget about Rocket Knight Adventures? Well, I still have yet to play it, of course. but maybe I'll have to play on children difficulty whenever I get to trying it. Look, I don't have the nostalgia for many side-scrolling platforms. I think Sonic's about it, to be honest. And so it's interesting to see the different attempts by developers, publishers, try to have their Sonic the Hedgehog. And an opossum knight with a rocket booster sounds pretty cool. I know that there are those out there who did play this game that remember it fondly, and I can see why. But I think how it's been handled since then, and we can just point fingers at Konami there, hasn't been great. But shouts out, wanted to highlight a Genesis soundtrack here, which we don't do too often.
Yeah, it kind of feels like Konami purposely threw this series under the bus by making it absolutely unapproachable to a regular person who can read. But I don't know if I'll ever play it. Every once in a while I'll go back and play a game I didn't think I would have ever gone back to play. And again, I have heard that this game is very good, especially in comparison to a lot of the other mascot platformers that were coming out around the same time, like Acro the Acrobat and Bubsy the Bobcat.
Yeah.
And many more that you could fill an entire crypt with just the dead bodies of dead franchise mascots that did not take off like Sonic did. So the fact that this one's still very fondly remembered is a good sign.
Absolutely. So to transition to our next game, let's highlight a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's on OC Remix, YouTube, wherever. I was looking up Rocket Knight Adventures cover, or Rocket Knight Adventures remix, and I found a piece by Carbohydro M. We've covered him on the show before. Oh, and it sounded so good. It was a really cool cover, but I'm like, I don't recognize the song. And he has the game highlighted as, Rocket Knight Adventures, Sparkster. And I'm like, okay, but where's the song? Oh, it turns out that the track he covered was from the SNES Sparkster game. Got it. So the sequel, that was actually the spin-off version. Okay, we're not using that one. So go check that one out. I think it was called Shooting. So check out that by Carbohydro M. Really cool cover if you're a big franchise fan of Rocket Knight Adventures. But as far as our purposes go, let's highlight Stizmask, STYZMASK, who did a really cool, I think it's almost EDM-like cover of Stage 7 and just brings in those deep throbbing house tones here. It sounds so cool. Please enjoy, and we will be right back.
Let's shift tones. Very hard. And also shift time, I guess, because these are very far apart. My game, Later Alligator, was originally released on September 18th, 2019 for PC, and then most recently it got a Switch release on March 16th of 2021, so it just hit Switch recently. It was developed by Pillow Fight and Small Boo Animation. It is a point-and-click adventure where you follow a nameless protagonist, and at the start of the game you're introduced to Pat. Now, Pat is an incredibly anxious and paranoid resident of the simply named Alligator, New York City. That's what it's called in-game. It's amazing.
Just a quick question. Are we doing this game because, as of time of recording, this is the day of the Loki TV series finale on Disney Plus, and Alligator Loki has been taking over the internet from the previous episode?
Completely unrelated. They just caught on to what I was doing. Kevin Feige called me and asked when I was doing Later Alligator, and that's when they decided to put that episode. Little known fact.
Got it. Thanks.
So Pat has checked himself into a hotel for his birthday, and he's incredibly worried about a thing that his family is planning for that night that they only refer to as the event. And he is absolutely convinced that the event is actually where his family is planning to, in his words, rub him out. by which he means murder him.
Oh, okay.
And the player is hired to investigate whether or not they're planning to murder Pat. And so you do investigate. Your mission is to travel all across Alligator, New York City and meet Pat's various family members and family friends. They all seem kind of cagey about giving details on the event, and in order to convince them to give it to you, you must complete a request for them in the form of a minigame. And these minigames can come in all shapes and sizes, from a pinball machine to a game of Old Maid to a soda fountain mixing experiment thing. All great. And successfully completing a character's minigame will reward them with a badge of that character. As the player collects these badges, they can speak to Pat's mom, who is outside the hotel, who challenges them to place the badges correctly on a family tree that she is trying to put together. And every minigame passes time, and once the clock strikes 8 p.m., it is time to take Pat to the event. There are 3 endings, and which one you get is determined by how many badges you get through that session. Once you've completed a run, you can then start from the beginning of the game, and you retain all of the badges that you previously got, so you can focus on just going to find the ones you missed the first time. I think for most people I've seen, it takes about 3 playthroughs to get everything. Your first playthrough is going to be like maybe 2.5 hours, and then the last 2 playthroughs will maybe be an hour combined, just in total. So what is the event? Spoilers, they're not planning to kill Pat. Are Pat's fears founded, or is he just a paranoid mess? Yes. And what is up with Pat's really weird family? This is where I'll ask Peter, what are your experiences with Later Alligator?
Well, even though I know nothing about the game, it sure sounds like a surprise birthday party, but we'll just leave it at that. So I see this game on our list of episodes that we're covering, and I'm like, all right, so we're just like tanking on views this week. That's what we're doing, because I feel like we have games that are like maybe a few people will care about, or maybe people come to us and like look to learn about, games that they've never heard about before. But yeah, I did not know a game called Later Alligator existed. Maybe that's on me.
It is an absolutely delightful game. It is really funny, very short playtime. Anybody can enjoy it. It's a very family-friendly game, too. Like, you could hand this game to like an 8-year-old and they'd probably overall be able to figure out the mini games and stuff like that. They're all very simple. And honestly, I think this might have been a snub from us in the best of 2019 episode.
Yes.
Because I hadn't played it. I had only heard the name. I didn't know anything else about it. And obviously you hadn't heard of it at all. So it just didn't show up. And that's unfortunate. But it happens.
And the soundtrack is amazing, actually.
It is absolutely fantastic. If you have any interest in like funny games, you really should pick up Later Alligator. And I mean, you specifically also should pick up Later Alligator. It's really fun. It's a delightful time. So let's talk about how this game was made, though. So Pillow Fight is a team of 2 developers, Joe Fu and Conrad Kraling. Their other titles include the games Ghosts of Miami, Rose of Winter, We Know the Devil, and Heaven Will Be Mine. The only game on that list that I recognize is I feel like I know something about We Know the Devil. I've seen the key art at the very least for the game, I think. I don't know. But who you may be more familiar with is Small Boo Animation, because they're the duo of Lindsay Small-Butera and Alex Small-Butera, and they are the animators behind the well-known internet cartoon Batman Piderman.
Oh, stop. That's amazing.
They also do a lot of bigger budget stuff on TV. Like the one that I see brought up the most is they worked on Adventure Time at certain points. So yeah, this came from the Batman Piderman people. If you want to know anything about the animations in this game.
Yeah, now that I have that in my mind, that checks out.
So the 2 pairs had actually met previously and very quickly ended up with the idea of creating a game together. So Small Boo were the ones who pitched the idea that would become Later Alligator, and then they worked on the writing and animation, while Pillow Fight took up the programming side of the project. The minigames specifically were built around simple concepts in order to make them all relatively simple to program, and the general gameplay flow, according to them, of talking to characters and playing a short game with them was inspired by the Professor Layton games, where you can talk to a character and they'll be like, hey, solve my puzzle. And also just generally Japanese visual novels were also an inspiration. In terms of aesthetic, though, most of the game's art direction was inspired by photos of ornate homes from the 50s and 70s, which also kind of led them to deciding on the noir aesthetic and theming that can be seen throughout the game. Development on Later Alligator lasted over 2 years. The game contains over 80,000 frames of animation and was done in Toon Boom Harmony, with some post-production work done in Adobe After Effects. There were so many animated elements at one point that certain environments that had a lot of moving pieces to them actually straight up exceeded the memory limits that the game had to work with. And the Wikipedia article mentioned that they fixed this by, quote, packaging every PNG separately. I don't know what that means. I know what a PNG is, but I don't know how that relates to animation. So I'll go ahead and just let the people that know more about animation know that, and you do with that information what you will. It was reviewed pretty well upon release, if it was reviewed at all, because, hey, this game hasn't gotten enough reviews on PC or Switch to have a Metacritic score. That's unbelievable to me. No, there should be more reviews of this game. We have failed as a society. OpenCritic puts it at an aggregate score of 86. One of the criticisms that I saw was that the minigames are kind of repetitive. I don't really agree with that. As far as I remember, there is one game that repeats a couple of times, which is you play Old Maid with 3 characters. That's literally the only repeating minigame I can think of. I don't know what they're talking about. But some also noted, specifically with the Switch version, is that having to control the game with an analog stick actually kind of makes some of the minigames a lot harder than they would be on a mouse on PC, which I can actually think of one right off the top of my head where that is 100% true. I know for sure what minigame they might be talking about, because I failed that one. But overall, a lot of praise was heaped on the game's art, the characters, the writing. It was praised as being very charming, very hilarious. I think Justin McElroy at one point talked about how it was a blast sitting down with his daughter and playing the game with her watching, and how she just had a blast with it. And I think, yeah, this is the perfect game for that kind of thing. And just in general, people should play Later Alligator. So the music of this game was done by a composer known as Matt Hopkins, though you probably don't know him by that name because his stage name, the more well-known one, is Too Mello. As a child, he was quickly drawn to hip-hop and electronic music, and he developed a fascination with the methods that they use to sound the way they do, basically. A quote off of his website says, quote, "How do you make this? Where are these sounds from? I had to know. It wasn't the instruments I had been familiar with. I'm still learning every day." So it was basically this isn't what I thought music sounded like. Music could sound like this? That's awesome. He got his first composition software at 13 years old. Says it was Scream Blast Acid 4.0. And though that software was kind of limited, because it was basically built to make simple soundtracks for home videos, is the way he phrased it, he still managed to learn how to use it to make drum loops and beats and stuff like that. He is mostly self-taught basically because of this. Another quote from his website, quote, "From there, I found great pleasure in practicing sampling and exploring synthesizers, digital effects, and all of the other wondrous advantages computers bring to the field of music." And eventually this experimentation led to him fusing other genres that he liked into that electronic and hip-hop stuff, such as classical music and jazz. In 2012, he signed with the label Scrub Club Records, which is something that seemingly put his creative drive in a really high gear, because while he was on that label for 2 years, he released 9 albums.
Oh, wow.
One of which was his first sort of major internet success, being the album Chrono Jigga, an album where he mashed up music from Chrono Trigger with lyrics from the music of Jay-Z and sort of brought them both together with his own beats, which I'd never heard about this until doing research for this show.
How have I never heard of this either? That sounds amazing.
It sounds incredible. He got his first work in video games in 2015 at the studio Midboss, who was working at the time on the game Read Only Memories, which actually we have a common acquaintance who worked on that game as well. So that's neat to know.
Huh. Did not expect that name to pop up.
In that same year, he also composed the soundtrack for the documentary Gaming in Color, which was a documentary about the LGBTQ community within video games. He still continues to work in the industry while also putting out original works. You can actually purchase a majority of his work, including the soundtrack to Later Alligator, on his Bandcamp at 2mellomakes.bandcamp.com, and the 2 is the number, not the written out word. He's actually been brought up on the show twice before, though, because when I did the episode on Jet Set Radio and Jet Set Radio Future, I actually used one of his tracks as our transition from that, because he did this incredible Jet Set Radio inspired original album called Memories of Tokyo To. And he's also working on a sequel to that album as we speak, which I'm super excited for. And also he was given an honorable mention in the Best of 2019 episode, where I believe If Found was, one of the honorable mentions on the list. And you can follow him on Twitter at Mello Makes. That's Mello Makes. In terms of his discography, again, he did Read Only Memories and also returned to work as the voice casting and sound director for the re-release 2064 Read Only Memories that came with full voice acting. Again, Gaming in Color. He did the soundtrack for the fighting game Cerebral, which is a fantastic name for a game. He did one of the B-side tracks in Celeste, being the Mirror Temple B-side track. He did the soundtrack with Ghosts of Miami, which was his first time working with Pillow Fight, which is the main reason why he would end up being brought on for Later Alligator. The game Regular Human Basketball, which I completely forgot about. What a great name for a game, though. He also mentions 2 games that I haven't heard of on his website called Squatbot and Killer Auto. Then, of course, Later Alligator, If Found, and the game Zodiac XX. Couldn't really find any interviews with him about the soundtrack of Later Alligator, which is a bit of a shame. There are a lot of interviews about Later Alligator, but they're all with Lindsay and Alex Smallbutera. But I was able to find a little blip that he wrote for his Bandcamp page on the album for Later Alligator. It says, quote, "The team was really creative with their needs and requests. This is 20 songs of jazz, blues, imitation ancient recordings, and some completely random surprises. I really got to work my range and use neat equipment and samples for genres that don't get enough love in game soundtracks. And there are so many cute reptiles too." Which, spot on description. So let's talk about how this game sounds, because it is such a good soundtrack. We're going to start with the main theme of the game. It's Later Alligator. Right off the bat, you can tell the exact vibe that this game is going for. Just fantastic jazz chops in here, and it also just really does a great job of capturing sort of the whimsy of the setting. I mean, you're walking around a place called Alligator, New York City, and like helping a guy with his haunted phone and stuff like that. And I think this really, really does a good job of illustrating that tone.
It sounds so good. I love it immediately. And you know what game they have to be inspired by? Grim Fandango.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I could see that.
I mean, you hear this kind of jazz driven by the clarinet especially, and I just get those vibes immediately.
Yeah, I could hear that. But that's not quite the case with the next song on the Critical 5, which I think actually might be one of my favorites. Close second for one of the later tracks. It's Alligator Blues.
I broke my teeth. Yes, I broke my teeth. Can't get no relief. Can't even chew my beef. From my tail to my nose, I am full of woes. That's just how it goes. Whoa, whoa, I bit my tail. Yes, I bit on my tail. Used to know it well. Now it's all out of scale. From my tail to my nose, I am full of.
So this song plays in the arcade, which for me at least was the first place I went in the game. And this song started playing and I was like, oh, so I have to bring this game to OSC.
Yes.
Like, I love this song. It's so fun. It's such a bop. I can't seem to find any information on who the vocalist is, so I'm not sure if it's a sample or maybe that's to Mello himself or what, but I think the vocal performance really like adds a lot of oomph to this song. I adore Alligator Blues. It's so good.
I think with the lyrics, I don't know if it's necessarily a sample. I think the lyrics are too clever for it just to be a sample. So maybe it is too mellow. But I love the post-processing on it. It makes me think a lot of the rock band The Black Keys. And just like how it's like a kind of crunchy, over-modulated, distorted vocal. Like, or almost like you're like speaking through like muffled. It sounds really cool. And yeah, I think this is probably my favorite as well.
I think what he was mainly going for with the post-processing is it sounds like it's playing off of an old jukebox.
Yeah, for sure.
Like it works perfectly for that. Following that is one version of the theme that plays when you play Gator games, the mini games, and that is Vintage Gator Games. So there are actually 5 variations of this song in the game, all themed around the type of character that you are doing this minigame for. That includes cute, cool, seedy, uncool, and of course, vintage. And as you might have guessed, vintage is when you are playing with the old people of the family. So most notably, I think it plays in all 3 of the Old Maid games with like, I think Pat's grandmother, Pat's great-grandmother, and then maybe Pat's great-great-grandmother who lives in a sarcophagus under the subway. Yeah, that's a thing that happens at some point. And honestly, I really like that this song has like this energy to it that you wouldn't expect from the version that's supposed to play when you are going and doing stuff with the old people. And I really appreciate that. I love this version. It's my favorite by far.
The trumpets are sharp and crisp. The piano is on point. God, just the piano jazz on this soundtrack, or at least the tracks you provided, is so good. And 3 songs into it, even when checking out the clips beforehand, I'm taken by this immediately. How did we miss it for 2019?
That's what I'm saying. I think I was personally waiting for it to come out on Switch before I played it, and that might have been it. Hindsight's 2020, you know? Let's bring the energy down a little bit for critical track number 4. It's Alligator Public Transit. So this song plays when you are riding the trolley to another part of the city, which you do kinda quite often. There's like 4 areas in the city, and you have to visit all of them to get all the family members, etc., etc. And, you know, for a song that really only plays like 10 seconds at a time until you reach your destination, this goes a lot farther than you'd think it would have to. It's just really, really nice and very soothing, and it kind of makes me feel like I'm getting on the train after a long day at work, and I just can't wait to be home, and it's got this almost melancholy feeling to it, but not really, and I absolutely, absolutely adore this song.
Put this on rainy mood, please. Thank you. It would pair perfectly with that. I do like how we're hearing a different side of this soundtrack. It's not just all the upbeat swing jazz, but the nice moody piece as well. Good pick. I really like this one too.
Anyways, let's bring that energy way back up. Let's talk about critical track number 5. It's Pat's theme. So there are a few times in the day where Pat calls you back to his hotel room so you can help him with something, and this is always the song that plays. Most notably, though, this song also plays during the final minigame, where you have to actually escort Pat to the event, and this is tied with Alligator Blues for my favorite song on the soundtrack, because it's such a fun song. Pat, as a character, is a cartoon character in a world that is already regularly occupied by cartoon characters. Like, he is laughably weird, even compared to a lot of his family. And I love him. I love him to death. And I think this energy really, really sort of reflects that. And also, the kazoo just always gets me every time I hear it. It's not an instrument I think you hear at any other point in the game, which makes it like all that more impactful. This is Pat. This is Pat in a song. It's manic. It's weird. It's overly paranoid. I absolutely adore it.
Not only do you rarely hear it in the game, you rarely hear it in video games, period. I'm almost surprised that this character isn't called Brett because of the kazoo. Oh, that's an obscure internet reference. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know what you're referencing even.
That's probably for the best. But yeah, no, this is a really fun song. And again, like, it's upbeat, but it's just a totally different kind of energy. You're right. That kind of manic paranoid vibe. You feel that with Pat's character. I even if the little I know about the game now, I think that fits and checks out.
Yeah, you could tell just from the song. You got to play Later Alligator, man. It's so fun. Mm-hmm. It's such a charming game. So I got 2 tracks on the cutting room floor. The first one is Unsavory Part of Town. As you might have guessed, this plays in the unsavory part of town, which is mostly just like the street outside of a kind of shady dive bar, and you can go into that dive bar and talk to a bunch of people. And this song sounds kind of sinister, more so than a lot of other stuff, but also like it doesn't give up the sort of whimsy that the game is sort of like hammered into you at this point. And also, while at first sight you're like, a crime could happen here at any moment, now everybody in that dive bar is a doofus, just like everybody else in the game.
I'll reiterate again. You guys listen to Grim Fandango making this, right? Like, has to be, right? It's exactly the vibe I get, whether it's, a Calavera's Club or anything like that. I mean, taps into that perfectly and, yeah, gets that kind of shady vibe here. I love it. Oh my gosh, perfect.
And for my second song on the cutting room floor, it is here because it's a very good song, but also because it's my favorite title on the soundtrack. It's Mandy, do you know any other songs? This plays in Alligator Memorial Park, and it is a very relaxing little piece, like I said. Best name. Mandy is a character that shows up in a lot of the game's marketing, and she shows up in this area too, playing music. She just has I think it's supposed to be a sitar? I don't know instruments.
Mandolin, maybe?
Maybe, but she's a street busker, basically. She's playing next to a fountain and everything. I love the idea that this is the only song she knows. And she's just playing it for the whole park. Man, Mandy is just another example of like, she's not even an important character, by the way, and I can remember who she is. She's not one of the people that you do a minigame for, and I still remember who that character is. It's such a good example of like, yeah, no, this game is really, really good.
So relaxing, and it almost sounds like a music box, right? It just kind of puts that kind of calm into you. Also, I missed, how did I forget, with the last track on Savory Part of Town. Shouts out Barry Sax. I mean, oh my gosh, any song with a Barry Sax is a good one.
Yeah. So what will I never forget about Later Alligator? Man, more y'all need to play it. I cannot recommend it enough. There's nothing like super groundbreaking about it, but the animation is fantastic. The minigames are simple and memorable. All of the writing is like laugh out loud hilarious. And I actually streamed it. You can see a full playthrough. Well, not a full playthrough. I didn't get the 2 other endings. But I streamed the Switch version for like 2.5 hours around the time that it came out on Switch. And that's actually on my YouTube channel, that whole VOD. And I just had a great time with it. And again, more people got to play this game.
Yeah, I'm interested. And I think, honestly, that soundtrack goes a long way to sell me on it. So while these may not be games that you've ever heard of before, trust me, I hadn't really either, these obscure anthropomorphic main characters hopefully can help win your heart. Whether it's, maybe you're an alligator too, I don't know, and Later Alligator, but at least with Pat, that cute little sad looking alligator, and Sparkster, the opossum knight, well, these soundtracks, certainly good to highlight from the Sega Genesis time to a more recent one that is, just love hearing good recorded jazz. That will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at String Pixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasherpieces, is hosted. And you can find Smasherpieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcast from. That's Apple Podcasts, that's Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed with our podcast episodes on it, but we also have a Spotify playlist. And if we cover a video game track on this show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to that playlist. Joe, anything added this week?
Well, Rocket Knight is not on Spotify. Konami's really weird about what they put on Spotify or not. Like, almost all of the Castlevania series is on there, but you have to dig to find it. And then only certain bits of Metal Gear Solid games that aren't Phantom Pain are on Spotify. It's odd. So Rocket Knight unfortunately falls victim to that, but Later Alligator happens to be on Spotify. But honestly, what I want to encourage more when it comes to like indie game soundtracks is go buy it on Bandcamp if you like what you've heard. Throw some money towards the composer there.
Yeah, give to Mello your money. Absolutely. It definitely deserves it. And when you're done listening, you can find us on social media at Soundchat OST for feedback and suggestions. How are we doing with these episodes? What games would you like us to cover in the future? Because that Rocket Knight Adventures, that was one of those suggestions. So thank you for recommending that. Really appreciate that. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Tsuyoshi Sekito.
I will be talking about Graham Norgate. Should be a fun pair of games next week. Looking forward to talking about it.
Looking forward to seeing what the theme ends up being.
Yeah, that too. All right, Joe, let's play us out.
I can't find any remixes or covers of music in this game. And hey, everybody, that's a crime and you're all going to jail. So I'm just going to play another song off of the soundtrack, and that is Alligator, New York City. It's another great jazz piece. Hope y'all enjoy. It's great. See you later, Alligator.
Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Sound Chat. We'll see you next time. Take care.